If you've been through some of these presentations with me, some of this will look familiar, but I figured we'd start at a fundamental level in terms of explaining how our finances are organized. We'll go through this pretty quickly. The two boxes at the top, those reflect our operating expenses and revenue, the day-to-day ins and outs in terms of where we spend our money, how we make our money to keep this community sustained. Importantly, on the left, and very much, we typically start in terms of our budgeting with the cost of sustaining this community. So the left side of this page, the expense side, where our personnel, our clergy, our staff is really the most important element of our budget. Followed by programming and then operations and overhead. Obviously, it takes some resources to keep the doors open and the lights on. On the right side, member commitment, as you'll see when I do put some numbers to this, member commitment being the most important component of our revenue, followed by tuition, which has a few forms, both ELC, religious school, B'nai Mitzvah tutoring, rentals, investment contributions. We have several different accounts that we have invested for the long term for sustaining the temple, and then external grants, which are very important as we think about our upcoming budget for the upcoming fiscal year. And then at the bottom, what we classify as non-operating. So these are things that are more variable year to year. They include trips, the temple play, those sorts of things that aren't necessarily part of our year-to-year budget. But we do have to account for them and fund those activities as well. So, but in general, thanks to the relentless stewardship of Becky, we are very, very disciplined in how we manage our finances. Just putting some numbers to the concepts on the prior page. Our fiscal year, we're about to complete, ending this month. You can see on the left side of the page our revenue, about $2.7 million in total, with nearly 50% coming from member commitment. Other important sources of revenue, ELC and religious school tuition, and I would point in particular to two items that collectively add up to $125,000, which are the security grants and the early learning state grant. So those are important variables as we think about the upcoming year. We've been fortunate to have the state of Massachusetts contribute to the cost of early learning in the current fiscal year, about $85,000. That's not something we can necessarily count on in the current budgetary fiscal environment for the state. Likewise, we received $40,000 to offset our security costs in the current fiscal year. We have received some federal grant money, but again, and we can go down that rabbit hole, but not something we can count on if we want to be conservative about how we budget for the upcoming fiscal year. On the right side of the page, you can see personnel, which accounts for nearly 2/3 of our budget, operations and overhead, security about $135,000. So that grant contributes towards our overall cost of security, but doesn't cover security. And unfortunately, as we all know, security remains an unavoidable expense of the temple. And then followed by education and worship. So in total, our revenue for this year, as it has for several years in a row, slightly exceeding our expenses, creating a little bit of a surplus, which we manage that by contributing it to our building fund. So once again, just an illustration of the very disciplined management of our budget by Becky in particular. Looking towards the current fiscal year, fiscal 26, you can see, again, starting, as I mentioned on the first page, starting with what our expenses are. What does it take to sustain this community? Just some highlights in terms of personnel, 3% cost of living, we're still in an inflationary environment, and very importantly, the addition of Cantor Snyder, which, having an ordained rabbi does bring certain costs. But we are obviously blessed to have him join our community, and we want to be able to support that addition to our staff. Followed by operations and overhead. The cost of just operating any organization goes up year to year, whether it's insurance or utilities. And then education, worship, and programming, which is actually down somewhat from the prior year. We always factor in the contingency, that 2% at the bottom. We do a pretty good job of budgeting, but we like to be conservative in terms if we are throwing a curveball throughout the year. So in total, expenses exceeding slightly 2.7 million. That's an overall increase of about 3%. How do we meet those needs? The top line being the member commitment, the largest line. I'll come back to that in a second. But you can see ELC tuition and religious school tuition, significant contributor to our budget, and we're budgeting a 4% increase there. And we also know the number of students, for example, in particular, who are going to be joining our ELC, so we can predict that with pretty good accuracy. Rentals down slightly. That's typically a function of the size of our B'nai Mitzvah class. And then there's a bit of a gap, right? The security grant, the early learning grant, which we are not budgeting to be present in fiscal 26. So that's an important gap that we need to fill. And lastly, our contributions from investments. Again, these are, I didn't delve into them in the prior pages, but these are our endowment, the door, which is just keeps on rolling. Eventually will be exhausted after 20 plus years. And then what we call our cash management account. So a little less than 10% of the budget coming from that. So in order to meet our need, our $2.7 million need, we need to grow our member commitment. And we need to grow that member commitment about 5%. We think that's achievable. This slide is illustrating sort of the progression of member commitment. As Becky pointed out, fiscal 23 was the last year under the old model, where we had innumerable categories of dues based on age and stage, what category you fell into. Since then, fiscal 24 and 25, we've had this choice-based model. And you, our congregation, has stepped up and we believe made that a success. Not just in terms of growing the numbers, but also underlying that, as you can see on the right, 60% of our returning members in the current year increased their gift from the prior year by an average of $500. 23% of the congregation stayed at their prior year pledge, and 17% decreased their commitment. We certainly love to see that last number be a lot smaller. And interestingly, one goal of the model was to reduce barriers to entry for attracting new members, and we don't require a financial commitment from new members, but 50% of new members did participate in member commitment, and those contributions from those members offset the loss from any resignation. So a pretty compelling number in terms of how new members have approached this model. What are our goals for the current fiscal year? As I mentioned, increasing member commitment by 5% to an aggregate of about $1.34 million in total contributions. Increasing that percentage of returning members who grow their giving. It was 60%. We'd love to see that get to 70%. Again, these are goals that we think are achievable, and that we have a plan to try to really push on whatever factors we can influence to drive these goals, in particular communication. Another goal is to retain 85% of our new members from last year or the current fiscal year and increase their giving. We saw that pattern with members who joined 2 years ago and what they gave in the subsequent year, and saw a significant increase in terms of their giving in their second year of membership. And also transition those now it'll be their third year of membership. For any new member, we want everyone to obviously stay with us, and we want them to continually find value in the temple and ideally grow their commitment commensurate with the value that they find in the temple. And then, as the model is unchanged in terms of allowing members or new members to join, take us for a test drive, and eliminate the barriers that exist in terms of trying to identify and bring in new members. So what does that mean for some of you in the room? We're still asked, Becky and I, what should I give? And especially for new members who may not have the same points of reference of people who've been participating in the model for a couple of years. So some things to consider as we try to push towards that goal of about a 5% increase in member commitment. I think it's worth understanding, asking yourself some questions, or if someone is asking you as an existing member, if they're a new member, how should I think about this? These are some of the things you can point them to. How much do you want to support TBA's vision? What value does TBA have in your life? Right, think just very holistically about that. What are the financial needs of TBA to sustain this community, some of which we outlined in earlier slides. And obviously, what is your own financial situation? So those, I think, are the key questions that should hopefully drive how much you choose to give to the temple. And again, it is still a choice-based model. And finally, as we sort of designed this model 2 years ago, there was a lot of debate about what these categories should be, but we just wanted to provide some guideposts. So whether you start at the supporter level, whether you start at the patron level, which would be wonderful for anyone in this room. Obviously, every gift matters. Along this spectrum, we have identified a level at which there's where contributors are considered major donors. That's from that anchor, that $57.50 and above. But again, truly, every gift matters. Like the temple's needs grow each year. We would love everyone in this room who's giving to consider a larger gift in the upcoming fiscal year. And for those people for whom may or may not be in this room, who did reduce their giving over the last couple of years, to ideally have found their level at which their contribution to the temple matches the value they derive from the temple. So, any questions on any of these slides? And do we need to vote on? Sorry? Say again?
I got that.
Okay. Sorry.